Coincidence?
I think maybe.
Not.
Oh,
okay, maybe.
Here we go. Let's find out. Kicking things off today, we have July 11th, 1991, and the Mayan calendar. On July 11th of 1991, a bunch of UFOs lit up the skies above Mexico City during a total solar eclipse. Thousands of people reported seeing a large metallic disc in the sky. Not only that, but footage of the object was captured and even broadcasted on the news. It was the first widely reported UFO sighting in Mexico City, which since that day has become a hotbed for UFO and unexplainable extraterrestrial activity. So what does this have to do with the Mayan calendar? Well, the calendar told of the July 11th eclipse, calling it the sixth son of Quetzalcoatl, and claiming that it would bring about change and cosmic awareness, which I honestly think it's safe to say it did. Whether or not the calendar accurately predicting the events of July 11th is just some strange coincidence, or if the Mayans really did mean to calculate aliens' first major coming to Earth, for now remains a mystery. But I hope not for long, because personally, I am super eager to know more.
Alright, this next one is almost too incredible to be a mere coincidence. I'd love to see someone try and break this down and have it make any logical sense. This is the story of two twin brothers separated at birth who grew up and reunited as adults, only to find that they'd basically led identical lives. They were born in 1940 and adopted into different families in Ohio. The twins had no contact with each other for nearly 4 decades, but when they finally reunited, the similarities in their lives were just too uncanny. Both were named James by their adoptive parents, which, alright, common but incredibly awesome name, and everyone named James is a winner, but, not all that crazy. There's more though. Growing up about 40 miles apart, they both went by the nickname Jim, and each brother would go on to marry a woman named Linda. After divorcing their first wives, both Jims found love again with women named Betty. Both also had sons who they each named James Allan. They also both had dogs. And what were their dogs' names? Well, one was named Toy and the other was named Toy. I'd get it if you named your dog Skipper or something like that, typical dog name, but Toy? That's odd. Both brothers also enjoyed woodworking and had a penchant for mechanical drawing. Even their choice of vacation spots matched up. Both Jims would often go to the same Florida beach. Their health habits were similar. Both had a history of headaches, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, and even gained and lost weight around the same periods in their lives. When Jim Lewis and Jim Springer finally met in 1979 at the age of 39, it was like they were looking at a slightly alternate reality version of themselves. The case of these twins is a pretty fascinating study on how much of our behavior and preferences might be hardwired into our DNA.
Next up, we have the strange life of Violet Jessop, who during her time working as an ocean liner stewardess was present for 3 separate ocean disasters, all on Olympic-class ocean liners, including one of the most famous disasters, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. On June 14th of 1991, Jessop was aboard the RMS Olympic when it crashed with the ocean cruiser HMA Hawk. The Olympic, which was at the time of the incident the largest civilian liner in the world, suffered heavy damage and flooded in the crash, but luckily it was able to make it back to Southampton and no one was killed or even seriously injured. On April 10th of 1912, Jessop was working as a stewardess on the RMS Titanic when it hit an iceberg and sank just 4 days into its maiden voyage. Luckily, she was able to board one of the ship's lifeboats and she made it safely to shore. 4 years later, on November 21st of 1916, Jessop was working aboard the HMHS Britannic when the ship hit a mine and sank in the Aegean Sea. It was the largest ship to be lost during the First World War. As the ship sank, Jessop attempted to jump to safety, but instead hit her head on the ship's keel. She did, however, resurfaced, was rescued, and survived. This girl's got 9 lives, or at least 3.
Speaking of the Titanic though, let's talk about a little novella called Futility. After the sinking of the Titanic, folks were quick to point out the eerie similarities between the circumstances surrounding the real-life disaster and a fictional novella written by American author Morgan Robertson. which was written in 1898, 14 years before the sinking of the unsinkable ship. So what were the similarities? Well, the story describes a big British passenger liner called the Titan that is deemed unsinkable, but strikes an iceberg and sinks. Not only that, but the ship in the story doesn't have enough lifeboats and sinks in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. All the circumstances I listed there, other than the difference in the name of the ships, is identical to what happened in real life in 1912.
Got a sinking feeling about that one. Next up on our list today, we have the coincidental closeness of the rare Chelyabinsk meteor and the 2012 DA-14 asteroid, two incredibly rare events that occurred 16 hours apart on the exact same day, but seemingly had nothing to do with one another. On February 15th of 2013, an asteroid entered into Earth's atmosphere over the southern region of Russia and exploded, with a force equal to 20 to 30 of the atomic bombs used at Hiroshima. 1,500 people were wounded, and 7,000 buildings experienced varying degrees of damage as a result. After the explosion, the ground below was hot and the entire affected area smelled like smoke. As I said, something like this is extremely rare, and the event was also the only time in history that a meteor has been known to cause human injury. Not only that, but the meteor was not detected by authorities prior to it entering into the atmosphere. If that's not crazy enough, just 16 hours later, another asteroid named 2012 DA-14 came within 27,700 meters, 17,200 miles, of the surface of Earth, making it the closest asteroid of its size to have ever been recorded in modern times.
I'm going to call this next story the real-life Final Destination, because it sounds like a death you'd see in Final Destination. That's a movie you've seen, right?
No.
Anyway, this guy just could not escape the fate that was waiting for him. Henry Ziegland was born in 1861 in Honey Grove, Texas. He was a farmer who began dating a woman named Charla Karras. They lived together for a time, but in 1883, Henry dumped her. This left Charla utterly devastated, and in her despair, she ended up taking her own life. Charla's brother was filled with rage and blamed Henry for her death, and he decided he was going to take his revenge. So one day he snuck into Henry's barn while he was tending to the horses and fired at him. The bullet grazed Henry, who then pretended to be dead. Believing he had killed Henry, the brother then turned the firearm on himself. Little did Henry know, but the bullet had lodged into a tree by the barn. Now, 20 years went by, and Henry decided to cut down a tree in front of his barn. It was too thick to cut with an axe, so he opted for dynamite. When the dynamite went off, Henry was killed instantly. Not from the explosion, he was a fair distance away, but from the bullet that had been lodged into the tree 2 decades earlier.
Next up, we have the strange life of Robert Todd Lincoln, or should I say strange saving. As we all should know, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in a theater on April 14th of 1865. What you might not know is that during his presidency, Lincoln actually bore witness to 2 other assassinations of very prominent members of American society. The first was the assassination of Elmer Ellsworth, a Union Army colonel who was killed by a hotel owner in Virginia in May of 1868, and the second was a Union Army general named James B. McPherson, who was killed during the Battle of Atlanta in July of 1864. What's cool about this is that it's not actually the weird part. What's weird is that prior to the death of Abraham Lincoln at the hands of John Wilkes Booth, Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was actually saved by John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin Booth. Edwin, who was a famous actor at the time, had seen Robert Todd fall between the platform and a train at a train station and quickly pulled him to safety before things got gory. At the time, Edwin had no idea who Robert Todd was, and Robert Todd later recounted the incident, saying, "I was indebted to him for the rest of my life." Pretty strange stuff.
Speaking of Abraham Lincoln, he shares some pretty uncanny similarities with John F. Kennedy. People have listed tons of coincidences between the two, too many to list here, but some of the most famous include Lincoln and Kennedy both being elected to Congress in a year ending in 46. Then both were elected president in a year ending in 60. They both had security agents named William, who died at the age of 75. The eeriest similarities surround their deaths, though. Both presidents died after being fired at in the head on a Friday, and both were sitting next to their wives at the time. Lincoln died at Ford's Theater, and Kennedy died in a Lincoln car, which was made by the Ford Motor Company. Both had been accompanied by another couple, the male in each couple being wounded in the attack as well. And both of their successors were named Johnson. Lincoln was succeeded by Andrew Johnson, and Kennedy was succeeded by Lyndon B. Johnson. Lastly, the names Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters. That's not a big one, but there's tons of others. Just read about it, it's nuts.
Next on our list, we have the striking life of Walter Summerford. And when I say striking, I mean it. Summerford was a British officer and a major in the British Army during World War I, who was struck by lightning 4 separate times on 4 separate occasions, 3 times when he was alive. The first time Summerford was struck was on the battlefield in 1981, after which he was paralyzed from the waist down. But luckily for him, after his retirement, he was rehabilitated, and after a while, he regained the ability to walk. Unluckily for him, just 6 years later, he was struck by lightning for a second time, and he became paralyzed on the right side of his body. Again, in time, he was able to regain the ability to walk and lived a normal life. Up until 1930, that is, when he was struck by lightning for a 3rd time while trying to walk through a park in Vancouver. This time he was paralyzed completely, and he remained bedridden until his death just 2 years later. He was laid to rest in a cemetery and given a gravestone that read, "In loving memory," although it's pretty hard to make it out now considering the fact that shortly after his burial, his gravestone was struck by lightning and split into 3 distinct pieces, one for each time he was struck while alive. Pretty strange coincidence.
Edgar Allan Poe is legendary when it comes to his fantastical tales of the dark and macabre, but in this case, truth was stranger than fiction because it was eerily close to a fictional work. In 1838, Poe wrote a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's about a young man named Arthur Pym who goes on a sea voyage. In one part of the story, though, the crew of Pym's ship finds themselves in a desperate situation. They're stranded without food, so they decide to draw straws to see who will be sacrificed so the others can survive. The unlucky one is the cabin boy named Richard Parker, who ends up being killed and eaten by the others. About 46 years later, in 1884, a real-life ship sank, and their survivors were stranded at sea, and just like in Poe's novel, the men found themselves without food and decided to draw straws to see who would be sacrificed. And who was chosen? It was a young sailor named Richard Parker. Need I say more? Well, that does got me thinking about the simulation theory a bit more.
Yeah. You guys, coincidental? You tell us. If you have any more, let us know.
And we are gonna catch you on the flippity flop.